Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turnwheel. I'm your host, I'm a Melee Kirby, and today we'll be taking a look at the characters of Lyndis' Legion, which includes Sain, Kent, Florina, and Will. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do SSS episodes in Lyn mode, because I don't think I actually mentioned this in the first episode, but you cannot get supports in Lyn mode. For whatever reason, they are all completely locked behind the main story of the game, Ellawood or Hector mode. So I thought maybe, we'll wait and just start doing them then. But we have a lot of supports to get through and a lot of characters to get through. Not as many as FE6. More supports for sure, because every character has like 6 or 7 supports on average instead of like 5. But there are fewer characters overall, so it pretty much evens out. My point, though, is that I wanted to get a head start on this before, we were behind and then had to throw in like 6 SSS episodes all in a row. Why the fuck did I name this series that? This is the stupidest decision I made in my entire life. Okay. Today we're here to talk about Lyndis' Legion. I talked about them last main episode. I commented on how much I like these guys and their dynamics and interplay with each other. Honestly, kind of short-sighted on my part, but they don't actually have that many supports with each other. A couple, but not that many. So this might not be as much overlap as I was kind of expecting it to be when I decided that I wanted to do Lyndis' Legion for the first episode, but it felt fitting anyway, so I decided to just stick with it, and, it is what it is. So I think we'll go ahead and let's start with Will. Will is probably my least favorite out of these characters, at least like the least interesting, I should say. He's not bad by any means. I think his supports are just generally kind of mundane. They give an interesting impression of him that you... Oh, there's my chicken.
It gives you the impression of him that you don't really get from playing the main story, which is that he is really fucking stupid. Really stupid. He's really scatterbrained, and kind of acts like a goofball. Which, I mean, you kind of get that vibe from him when he's, when you recruit him and he's like, "I'm broke, I have nowhere to go, please help me." So I guess you could read it that way initially if you wanted to, but I didn't read it that way when I first got him. So this was kind of interesting to me to read through his supports and see like, oh yeah, he's not all there. Not all of his supports are about that, though. Like, his Lyndis support is pretty good. It's basically about him telling Lyn that he hasn't been home in a while or written to his parents in some time. In fact, most of his supports have something to do with his family or his previous life before meeting Lyn. Lyn chastises him for not writing home often enough and saying that, says, oh, your parents are probably worried about you, and they come to an understanding, like, he's going to write home more. She's going to back off about it because she's being a little bit of a busybody. It's cute. Nothing to write home about, but it is, it's all right. Oh, and Lyn also gives Will some praise that some of the other knights have given him, which is cute. The Rebecca support is interesting because Will actually knew Rebecca prior to the events of the game. And they argue for a little bit. I don't really think the support is as interesting as it had the potential to be. Basically, they argue a little bit because Rebecca's mad at him because she left home, or because he left home and never wrote back. Apparently, he took off with her brother as well. And what's interesting about this, and is kind of set up for some stuff that we're going to see later, is that Rebecca's brother never came back. Like, Will split up from Rebecca's brother. His name is Dan. And Will assumed that he just went straight back home because, he called it quits and couldn't do this adventuring life anymore. But Rebecca says that Dan didn't come home. So they're kind of both coming to to terms with the fact that her brother and his best friend are, is probably dead, or at the very least missing, which is, a lot to deal with. And they have a nice little moment about that. This is one of the romantic supports. In fact, I think this is his only romantic support. So it ends with them being married and having a relationship. Rebecca, incidentally, we haven't met Rebecca yet, obviously, but she is canonically Walt's mother from FE6. So whoever she marries here is, I guess, in your version of the game, Walt's father. Unfortunately, too much of the support is taken up by arguing for it to be like truly interesting to me, but it's fine. He has 6 support partners, by the way. I forgot to mention this. He has supports with Lynn, Rebecca, Wrath, Dart, Wallace, and Raven. Wrath and Will's support is actually pretty cool. I like this one a fair bit. Essentially, Will and Wrath kind of, talk to each other. It reminds me a little bit, actually, of the Walt Sue support from FE6, where they're both kind of like showing each other how to do different things that they're experts in. But they take this concept a little bit deeper, which I like. Wrath comments that Will is unexpectedly willing to show weakness and vulnerability to people, and Wrath says, "Aren't you like afraid about that?" And Will kind of is confused. He says, "No, why should I be if we're friends?" And Wrath, he and Wrath kind of come to an understanding about that. I think this is the only time in Wrath's entire any of Wrath's support or the main story where he actually laughs. Will tells a joke. He says, Will says, "I might as well be normal archer number 3," which is, very funny and self-aware. And then Wrath says, "Number 3, why 3?" And Will says, "Well, no reason, I guess. It just seemed pretty normal." And then it's not explicitly shown, but like Wrath has the ellipses, and then in the next support, it's implied that he like was trying to hold himself back from laughing at that, which is just funny. I relate hardcore to just like weird things making me laugh and like triggering a sense of humor that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And Wrath ends the support on a nice note by telling Will that he taught him something valuable, which, presumably is the willingness to be, I guess, vulnerable with people who you care about. And Wrath's backstory is adds a certain layer to this. I don't remember all of the details of Wrath's backstory, but I know the gist. And it's him showing weakness was considered very taboo, and this is probably good for him to interact with somebody who actually is just willing to be themselves, even if that means being a little vulnerable sometimes. The Will Dart support is mostly for backstory. Will sees Dart and instantly says, "Oh, hey, you're Dan. I've been looking, I had no idea where you were. What are you doing here?" And Dart's like, "I don't know who you're talking about. My name is Dart, not Dan." And they basically just talk about... Will calls him Darth by accident. They basically just talk about what happened, and it's never explicitly stated, but the implication is that the very, very heavy implication, bordering on being canon, is that Dart is Dan. When Will and Dan split up, however long ago it was, Dart got injured, or Dan got injured, and lost his memory. He gives the whole backstory here. In fact, I'll just read it out. Well, about 5 years ago, Fargus pulled into a port at Baden. Fargus is Dart's like pirate captain, because Dart is a pirate. And a young man had collapsed on the pier. He was bleeding pretty badly. They say it was a miracle he lived at all. Everyone in town just pretended not to notice, and no wonder. That day was a holy day for Elamine's flock. They were forbidden any contact with blood, and the sailors, well, you know how superstitious they are. That man lay there, half alive, for 6 hours. Then the taboo lifted, and someone picked him up just in time. It was the leader of the pirates that work out of Baden. Well, that young man recovered, but as if in exchange for his life, he had lost all his memories. And that's basically how the support ends. So the implication there is obviously that Dan is Dart, and that he just has amnesia. Now, what I find funny about that story is it's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be like this big reveal of why Dart is so loyal to Fargus and why he sticks with him and why he thinks he's such a great captain. But I feel like they fucked up a little bit here, right? And maybe this is a bad translation or something, but wouldn't it make more sense if Fargus was the only one willing to lift or willing to break this taboo to save his life? Wouldn't that make it more meaningful instead of just he happened to be the first one who grabbed him when it was okay to do so again. I mean, would other people not have done that? I mean, the taboo was lifted, so why not? I don't really get it, but I'm getting hung up on a small detail. It's. I mean, I wouldn't really call it that interesting. It's mostly just giving backstory for Dart, which is fine. It's nothing bad, but it's nothing to write home about either. The Wallace Will support is just a very funny comedy support. I mean, I'm not even sure if I would call it very funny. It's pretty funny though. It made me chuckle. Basically, Wallace thinks Will is too scrawny, and that he should be a knight. So he just puts Will through some very rigorous training. And it's goofy, it's silly, but it's fun. I like it. Now, this is a very funny. This next support, the Raven support, is pretty funny. If you actually know some Japanese. And by know some Japanese, I mean like watch any anime. But apparently they didn't expect Western audiences to be able to understand any kind of like Japanese honorifics. But basically, Will and Raven meet, and Will is just his normal chipper, happy-go-lucky self, and fucking Raven is Mr. Ow the Edge, Cold Steel the Hedgehog. And it's a very funny seeing them interact. Will starts calling him Senior Raven. So he says like, "Oh, nice to make your acquaintance, Senior." And he says, Senior Raven, how may I help you? Clearly in Japanese, I don't know this for a fact. I haven't checked, but this is obviously, he's supposed to be saying senpai here. Which is, it's funny when you kind of sub out that word, it makes a lot more sense. It just feels so stilted in English, and I kind of wish that they had just, taken the gamble on people not knowing what it means and letting them work it out in context. But it's fine, I guess. It's just one of those idiosyncrasies that doesn't translate well to. I guess the bigger thing. I don't think they should have just thrown in senpai in there. I don't think that really would have been good either. I think they should have just taken more liberties with the translation of the support, which this game does not shy away from doing. So I don't know why they didn't do it here. I guess the Will Raven support did not necessarily get all the attention from the Raiders, which is fair enough. There's an interesting bit here that I might be reading too much into. But I'm gonna read out the whole A support because I think there's an interesting tidbit about Will's character here that I like. So it starts with Will, and Will says, "Howdy, Raven. What is it, Master of Rudeness? What's that? A name. I think it suits you. Hey, don't go giving me weird names like that. Sorry. In a bad mood, sir? What do you think? How the heck should I... Look, with you, Raven, it's either scowling or terrifying. Yet the scowl does not stop your prattle, does it? Yeah, I mean, what if that's just your normal face, like you say? How am I to know? You might really not be mad. And if I was really mad, well, yeah, that'd be frightening. But when you're really, really mad, Raven, I bet you're the type to say nothing and just cut away with your sword. So you're not really mad now, right? And then Raven pauses for a second and he says, "Tell me, your cluelessness, is that just an act?" Which I think is fun. I think it kind of... I mean, so Will hits the nail on the mark here, right? Like, obviously, we know Raven. We've seen multiple of his supports, and we know him from the main story. That is absolutely what Raven would do. If he was actually angry, he would just start attacking Will with his sword. So he's not really mad. He's just, kind of mildly annoyed. And the fact that he nails Raven so accurately, I think, has Raven say, like, are you actually this dumb, or are you just acting? Which is an interesting question. I mean, is maybe the implication here is that Will is a bit smarter than he lets on, which could be kind of cool. Never really comes up, but it could be interesting. So yeah, that's all of Will's supports. I like him. I think he's a fun, silly little guy, but he's not that interesting of a character. I don't think any of his supports are even like above average. I think they're just pretty all right. Okay, let's move on to Kent after I take another bite of my chicken. So, I meant to buy sweet and sour chicken, but I bought orange chicken instead, which is fine. I don't like orange chicken as much, but it's all right. I'll still eat it. But now it's just really orangey, and it's kind of gross. I probably put too much sauce in. Okay, on average, Kent's supports are much better. I really like several of his supports. His Lyn support is actually not one of them. Oh, I'm not going to do it again. He supports with Lyn, Sain, Fiora, Florina, Wallace, and Heath. I think most of his supports are really good. In fact, I think all of them are good except the Lyn one. I think the Lyn one is kind of lame, which is unfortunate. So Kent and Lyn have a romantic support. Their ending is an A support where they end up in a romantic relationship together. And they're cute together. I like that concept. I think Kent and Lyn are good for each other. I think it's a cute ship. But the actual build up in the support is kind of whatever. So basically, Kent is just doting on Lyn a whole bunch, and Lyn doesn't really mind necessarily. It doesn't seem like, like she's grateful that he's looking out for her. But it seems like as the support goes on, she gets more preoccupied with the idea that he's only doing it because he's like, he's a knight to the house that she serves, and not necessarily that she's doing it for him, or that he's doing it for her, rather. And in the A support, he says, no, I even if you weren't my lord, I would still feel the same way about you. Please, let's, be together forever or whatever. It's not bad, it's not a terrible support or anything. I just think it's a little bit, they could have done more with this concept, I guess. The Sain support is fun. Basically, it's just more of their story dialogue, basically, which is fine by me. Their story dialogue is awesome. And seeing them interact more in that way is a treat. So I'm certainly not complaining. But you're not really going to get anything here that you don't expect. So I do actually want to mention something, and this is the first time of probably many that I will, at least the first time intentionally, and certainly not the last time intentionally, basically borrowing an observation from a series of Reddit posts that you may have heard of. If you've been on the Reddit for a while, the main Fire Emblem subreddit, if you've been on that Reddit for a while, then you might remember a series of posts from many years ago now called the A-List. And the A-List was a series of long-form analyses of the supports in Fire Emblem 7, basically. And it was done by a user named Lack of Interest, who is cool. He's a nice guy. And he did these support deep dives, which I think are very well thought out, very well articulated, and so I may end up borrowing some observations from him. I mean, I'm doing it right now. I guess I should say that I may end up unintentionally borrowing some observations from him, but if I know for a fact that I'm taking something from one of his A-list posts, then I will call that out specifically. So in this case, what he calls out is interesting. It's one of the few instances of gameplay story integration in the supports. What I mean by that is, in the GBA games, we've talked about this, I think, you can only have up to 5 support conversations. So at most, you can have 1 A support and then up to like B support with somebody else. Or you could have 5 C supports, or you could have 2 B supports and a C support, or, etc. Any combination that adds up to 5, essentially. And so what that means is you will only ever be able to get an A support with 1 character. Now, the implication in the Kent Sain A support is that so basically, I guess I should build up to this a little bit first. So, Kent and Sain are bickering back and forth, doing their thing. And then in the B support, Kent, Sain catches on that Kent has feelings for Lyn, and Sain offers to kind of like give him some advice, which, debatable how well that goes, but, we'll talk about that, I guess. And then I guess, more importantly, Sain flirts with everybody, so the obvious thought would be, okay, well, is Sain going to try to get in his way to end up with Lyn? But no, he actually says, like, I'll let you, as misogynistic as this is, he says, I'll let you have this one, buddy, you can take her. That's really the best way that I can put it. It's basically what they're saying. And he, and so Kent decides, presumably, to shoot his shot. And now this is where the interesting part comes in. If you get the A support between Sain and Kent, it is implied that he did shoot his shot and that Lyn turned him down. And so they just start broing out and being like, yeah, you know, as you know, we're best friends and we're gonna stick together to the end or whatever, and that's great. I love that. What's interesting about that mechanically though is that it narratively is that it reflects the mechanics of the support system. So if you are getting the A support with Sain, that means that by necessity you did not get the A support with Lyn. Therefore, you can kind of choose in this interesting way, in the same way that we talked about with Ray. You can choose the path that this character goes down based on who you decide to support him with, right? So if he supports Sain and gets the A support, he gets rejected by Lyn. If he supports Lyn and gets the A support, then he and Lyn end up together. So that's a nice little detail there that I'm a fan of. Okay, all right, here we go. This is one of my favorite supports in the game, and I'm so glad that we're getting to it early. I really am excited to talk about this one. So this is the Kent Fiora support, and it starts off pretty uneventful. Fiora and Kent meet. Kent says, you know, he I guess it's not a joke for him, but he, you know, for the audience it's a joke. He mentions that Florina often told Kent that he reminds her of his sister Fiora, or her sister Fiora. And so Kent mentions that, and, you know, they're both very kind of uppity is the wrong word. Uptight, that's the word I'm looking for. They're very uptight. They're kind of sticks in the mud, very by the book, no nonsense people. And so they, you know, they get along really well. Now, the B support is where it starts to get funny. They notice, they kind of start to engage in a little bit of a moral panic, because they start saying like, you know, it's a bit weird that all the men and women in this army are so close to each other. I mean, don't you think that we should have stricter guidelines about how the men and women should interact so that we don't sink into moral degeneracy? I mean, they don't go quite that hard on it, but that's basically the idea that they're getting at, is that they don't want any debauchery to take place between the sexes. So they agree that tonight they're gonna meet. They're going to meet up and they're going to come up with an outline for how they might implement some new rules about male-female interaction. And that's good. Good for them. I'm happy that they're being productive. Now, something happened in that meetup, in that tent, wherever they met. And I need to know what happened in that tent. Because the A support starts off with them being really awkward around each other, apologizing to each other. And then basically they're like, okay, so we're on the same page about like we're dating now, right? Like that's a thing. And then neither of them really have to like think about it too hard. So, I mean, I don't know, guys. I'm pretty sure they fucked in that tent. I'm just saying. And that's, I mean, I don't know. Like, it's just really funny to me in a series, and you know, the supports are usually so, I mean, I guess boring is the best way to put it, right? I love the series. I love the writing in the series, but they never really try to do anything. They very rarely, I should say, try to do anything interesting with the writing in that way. And now we're seeing it, you know, 2 for 2 with the Sain support. And then now where it's like they're actually taking this concept and using it to explore interesting ideas. With the Sain one, obviously, the idea that 2 A supports can kind of like dictate the path of a character, and in this case it's like the gap in between supports, it's like if you see the C support and then the B support, most of the time it's like they could be part of the same conversation. Usually there's some lip service to like, oh hey, you know, it's been a little while, or how have things been going since the last time we talked, right? The idea is that they don't really use that negative space for anything interesting. It's just, you know, they stop and then they pick up again in the B support. Whereas in this, they're the negative space between the B and the A supports is like palpable with something. What is it? I don't know, but it's definitely there, and I think that's cool. At least I can't think of a time that they did this in FE6, and I certainly can't think of many times that they do it in other games. But I might eat my words here. Maybe it's more common than I'm remembering. But anyway, I think this is I think this is a really good support. It's one of my favorites in the whole game. They do have a romantic ending together that I think is very cute. and it's just, they're just a cute couple together, right? Like they're both very similar in a lot of ways, and I think they mesh well together. And I don't know, I just think it's funny, especially, I mean, it's because they're so uptight, and because they're so like interested in like maintaining that moral rigidity, and saying no, men and women shouldn't mingle. It's going to lead to nothing but problems. There's a line at the end where Sain says, what does he say? I am glad, but about that policy I suggested, what should we do? And Fiora said, well, perhaps it can wait. So, I don't know, I just think it's funny. Now, the Florina support is actually also romantic, which is funny because they're about as opposite as you get. Florina is much closer to Sain than she is to Kent, although not really in like a womanizing kind of way. Just in a personality, she's a very laid back kind of free spirit type. Oh, I guess technically it is not a quote unquote romantic support. There is no romantic ending between them. It just says that Kent decides to leave Kaylin and work as a mercenary alongside her, or something to that effect. And I think this is kind of more what you would expect from a traditional romantic Fire Emblem support. They're both opposites. They are so different in so many ways, but in a sense that works out really well because they both bring out the best in each other. They kind of help each other, balance each other out, I guess, is the best way to put it. I think it's funny that Florina, as the support goes on, clearly has feelings for him, and Kent is just like not picking up on it or like ignoring it intentionally. It's funny. Oh, and there's a line in here that I fucking love, where Florina's like, "Oh yeah, we're seeing each other a lot recently, huh?" And then she speculates as to who could be responsible for this, and Kent's like, "Come on, what would anybody stand to gain by having us fight together on purpose?" And, it's just a nice little fourth wall break there that I think is funny. Kent and Wallace have a support, and it is pretty good. It boils down essentially to Kent asking Wallace about loyalty, because you see, Wallace was a knight of Kaylin back when, before Lyn was born, her mother and father eloped together, and Wallace was sent to retrieve Lyndis's mother, and the Marquess of Kaylin, it was established, we talked about it last episode, he was very angry, he hated the fact that this happened, and he was insistent that she be brought back to him. And Wallace went to go catch up with them, and he did, he found them, and both of them said, "This is not on the other person, this is entirely me, please, don't do anything to harm the other person." And Wallace kind of saw that and realized that he could not in good conscience split them up, and so he decided to let them go. And he later lied and said, "Yeah, I couldn't find them, they got away from me," and was given like a short little stint in the dungeons or whatever. And Kent was kind of flabbergasted by this. He's like, you betrayed your liege lord. How could you do that? Not in like any kind of angry way, mostly just surprised. Like, why did you do that? And Wallace says, it's a pretty traditional story you see a lot in across the entire series, and of course in other media, where it's like, if a knight is loyal, what does loyalty really mean? And is it better to carry out unjust orders in the name of loyalty? And Wallace argues no. And Kent's like, well, and that's where it would end if this was FE6, which is why I think on average these supports are so much better. That's where it would end if this was an FE6 support. But the FE7 support takes it a step further, and Kent asks, well, how do you know the difference, right? Like, it's good to be loyal, it's good to be right, and sometimes like do the right thing, do the just thing, and sometimes those things contradict each other. How do you know what to follow? And Wallace says, well, you'll know it in your heart, obviously, because it's of course the generic, you just follow your heart and you'll make the right choice. But he gives a little bit more actionable advice, which I think is good, which is basically, if you truly love the Lord that you work for and you have their best interests at heart, you will know the right thing to do. And that is how you will most commonly overlap loyalty with being just, because in a way, Wallace did do the loyal thing, because eventually, of course, Marcus Kalen decided that he was wrong, and that he shouldn't have been so angry with them in the first place. And Wallace letting them go gave him an opportunity to realize that. So, in a sense, Wallace did do the thing that was best for Marcus Kalen, even if it didn't seem that way at the time. So, I don't know. It's a little bit. I'm spending a lot of time on what I would definitely call a very generic plot idea or generic support idea, but I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. All right, and finally the Heath support, which is pretty good. It's mostly good for Heath rather than Kent, but essentially Heath says, "Hey, I want to join the Kalen Knights," and Kent says, "Well, if you're serious about that and you're strong, we'll gladly have you." And then Kent says, "Well, I'm a little bit confused because the Burn Wyvern Knights," Heath is a Wyvern Knight, by the way. "The Burn Wyvern Knights are so strong and are so world-renowned, why would you want to leave them?" And Heath says, "Well, my unit had to carry out unjust orders and we had to kill innocent civilians, and I didn't want to be a part of that. His unit was the one that actually stepped in to save the civilians, but he was sentenced to death for treason, basically. So he decided to bail." And it's just the Heath backstory support. What I think is nice, though, is that in the A support, Heath talks to Kent. He's clearly been jaded by the people that he's had to work for over the years and not really finding them, people that he feels like he can truly show his loyalty to. But he talks to Kent and he says, "I met Lyndis, I talked to Lyndis, and you're right. She's everything you said she would be, and I have no issues working for someone like that." Which is just nice. He's finally found someone who he feels he can truly be a knight in the service of, someone worthy of his loyalty. And there's no support, there's no ending here unique to this support, but I feel like there probably should be, right? Like he says, he straight up just says, "I'm gonna come back and join the Kalen Knights." Essentially, that's basically what he says. But it's one of those things where you can kind of like put in your own ending, I guess. All right, next up, let's move on to Sain. Kent is great. I like a lot of his supports, but we'll move on to Sain next. So as I've mentioned before, I really like Sain. I think he's one of the better characters in the game. But I think a big part of that is mostly his story dialogue, because his supports aren't bad per se, but honestly, none of them particularly stood out to me as being like excellent. They're all very repetitive. I mean, you guys know the drill at this point. This is the womanizer character. We've seen it with Saul in the last game. Pretty much that's it. I mean, FE4 and 5 had like a couple, but they didn't have supports in those games, so it wasn't as blatant. But you can basically just think Saul and kind of the same situations that he got himself into over and over again. They're basically just treading the same ground here with Sain. There are a couple things though that I wanted to talk about. He has how many support partners? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Kent, we've already talked about. I do like Sain in this support. I think that this is like one of the few times where we get to see him focus on something that isn't women. He still manages to make it about women because, obviously, as we talked about, it's about It's about Kent being in love with Lynn and how Sain responds to that. I do think it's, I do think it's pretty cool here that he's like, this is like the only time in the game that we see him pass up an opportunity to like flirt or get with a woman. As soon as he realizes that Kent has any feelings for Lynn, he, decides to back off, which in his own kind of like misogynistic, pig-headed way is like kind of nice, I guess. And shows that he really respects Kent, as he's willing to do something that he would probably not do for anybody else. As we see, he's even hesitant to do it for someone he actually ends up marrying. So, worth mentioning, I think. The Sarah support is alright. It's just kind of funny. I love Sarah. Spoiler alert, Sarah is very high up there for me in this game. So, pretty much all the supports that she has in it are great, although this one is probably near the bottom for me out of her list, honestly. They just kind of shoot the shit back and forth. It's alright. And the A support is funny because she basically calls Sain out on being a creep, which well earned, if you ask me. The Priscilla support is interesting. For some reason that I don't fully understand, the writers of this game fucking hate Priscilla so much. So many of her supports, at least from what I remember, have like romantic undertones. And this is one of them, actually. This is one of the few supports where Sain and, a woman like hit it off and they genuinely like learn to care about each other. But then it just goes nowhere because Priscilla has to be sad for some reason. They decided that she just has to be sad all the time. It always has to be about a man too, which, like, I'm not going to get up on my soapbox about that. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to do that, but, you know, that's kind of fucked up, I think. Like, why is it always got to be a guy? I'm just saying. I mean, I think the reason is because there's like a weird vibe going on with Priscilla and Raven, but that's a whole other can of worms that we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, this is I like the support. If it ended in them like getting together, I think it would be pretty good. But as it stands, she's just like really sad because she's like, you'll have to return to Lycia and be away from me. And I mean, that doesn't like he goes off and marries. Excuse me. There are paired endings that Sain has where he just leaves Lycia. I think that one in particular. I think. So I don't know why he couldn't just leave Lycia to be with Priscilla if he really wanted to. I mean, maybe he doesn't really want to. I don't know. Maybe going into the whole, like, maybe, Sain can't really bring himself to commit to any one woman, which is kind of a recurring issue that he has. But anyway, the support's alright. A bit of a disappointing ending, but it is what it is. The Louise and Sain support is pure comedy. He tries to hit on her. He realizes that she's married and, like, basically spends... So Louise is an interesting character because she already has, like, a pre-built A support with Pent. So all of her support partners can only ever go up to B. So basically, Sain just spends 2 supports waffling about how sad he is that she's married. It's alright. It's funny. The Isadora support... I honestly quite like this one. He, obviously he starts off hitting on her because that's what he does. But, she takes the opportunity to kind of like challenge him to a fight. I think, hold on, let me double check. Okay, yeah, so basically, he tries to hit on her. Isadora's like, I'll hang out with you, but only like training. Like, I want to train with you. And if you win, then I'll agree to hang out with you again. And, Sain says, yes, okay, sure. And he gets his ass beat repeatedly. But by the end of it, like Sain honestly seems more interested in the training than in being with Isadora, which is, a nice deviation from his usual character. I mean, by the end, he still like wants to like take her out to dinner and all that. Although even that in a way is kind of progress because when he starts hitting on her, he immediately starts wanting to just like jump straight to the sex, basically. I mean, they don't outright say that, but that's basically what they're getting at. But then by the end, he's asking her out to dinner first, which is like, I guess that's progress. I don't, when it comes to this guy, you kind of have to take what you can get, I suppose. But honestly, I do think that he's a little bit more excited about the idea of Isadora training more of the Knights of Faerie, which is pretty cool. Or the Knights of Kaelin, rather. She's a Knight of Faerie. Okay. And I saved the last 2 because these are the ones that Sain has paired endings with, where he ends up, marrying them. There's Sain and Rebecca. I'll just talk about that one first, actually. This one's actually probably my favorite of his. I don't know for sure. It's just another like romance support, but this one's like kind of funny and kind of cute. So I like the direction they take this in. Basically, he flirts with her, and she's like the only person out of all of these fucking women that actually like I guess fall for it. Like she's flattered. She's she thinks he's being sincere when she doesn't really understand that he kind of just does this with everybody. Eventually she finds out and gets mad at him. But he is persistent, and eventually she's like, okay, well, I guess I'll go out with you. But if that's the case, and you really like gonna commit to me, then you should go tell Lynn that we're in a relationship now. And Sain doesn't want to do it, so Rebecca gets mad at him again, and that's the end of the support. And yet they end up, getting married and having a child together. Which, by the way, is I think I might have mentioned this already actually, but Walt is Rebecca's child from FE6. So any character that you pair her with is Walt's father, I guess, in the continuity of the games, or at least your version of the games. So we can assume something maybe happened off screen where like he made it up to her or whatever. It's nice, it's the same song and dance that he does with all these guys, but I think the fact that like she responds to it a little bit differently and has a bit of a more interesting interaction than the others, is kind of makes it a little bit more interesting for me. But yeah, it's all right. The Fiora support is his other paired ending is with Fiora, which I don't get this one. Honestly, like I don't think this one really makes any sense at all for him to end up with her just based on their support. But basically, he wants to fight alongside her. She's like not really open to the idea at first. She kind of just wants him to leave her alone. But he is persistent, and he tries to fight alongside her again. This time, though, he has some kind of fever. I don't know if he's sick or maybe it's like an infection from getting injured or something like that. He's not well, basically, and yet he's like really pushing himself to try to fight alongside her. And Fiora, I mean, it seems like Fiora kind of nurses him back to health. I mean, the best I can assume is that the fact that he was so willing to like, put himself out there for her, even at like the cost of his own safety, like kind of did something for her. That just doesn't really seem like her style though, right? Like she's very like uptight, very, like by the book. So it doesn't seem like the type of thing that she'd be into, but I don't know. Like, I guess she has a diverse set of tastes, I suppose. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I don't really get this one. I like Fiora. I mean, Fiora and Kent is maybe like my favorite pairing in the entire game. So, I saying that I don't like this one as much as Kent isn't really saying anything, but it's all right, I suppose. So yeah, Sain's support's not that good on average, which is a shame. And I think he's one of the more popular characters in the game, but I honestly do think that has to do more with his story dialogue, because his dialogue in Lin mode is genuinely fantastic. It's really funny. You can tell that he's like a very loyal and passionate knight, and he's just like a pretty cool guy all around. Whereas this is the same problem that all of the womanizer characters in this series fucking have, is that all of their supports are exactly the goddamn same, and it's boring, the obvious problems of having a sex pest character. I guess, it's a little bit more PG-13 than that, but, that's the same archetype of character, right? Just someone who just does not leave women alone. The ethical implications are obviously bad, but even putting that aside for a second, it's just fucking boring. Like, just do something different with the character, for God's sake. A lot of these characters have potential, but they just got to keep, in the case of Sain, it's just repetitive, or in the case of, some more explicit sex pest characters, for a personal example, I really like Sanji from One Piece. Anytime I say that, I get weird looks, because of course I do, because he's a fucking freak, and like he's a horrible person, and he treats women like garbage. Well, maybe not entirely true, but he's just a shitty human being who is he's a sex offender. He's like a literal sex offender in the story, and everyone's just like, haha, Sanji, classic Sanji, and it just fucking sucks, man. I think he's a cool character, and it's just Oda. It's just Oda. Really, really just one guy continuing to make him do this shit. Anyway, gonna move away from that before I go on a whole rant about One Piece, which I'm sure you guys do not want to hear. Sain is fine. Sain's a pretty cool character in the story dialogue, in his supports. Definitely very hit or miss. Mostly miss, if I'm going to be honest. I actually don't think his supports are very good. But some of them are alright. I do genuinely like the Rebecca one, and then like the Isadora one is pretty solid, and the Priscilla one. But most of the rest of them are pretty bad. Okay, moving on to Florina, the resident Pegasus Knight. Florina has also 7 support partners: Hector, Lynn, Farina, Fiora, Ninian, Nino, and Sarah. Most of these guys we haven't actually even are like pretty late game recruits, honestly. So Florina's supports are really, really good on average, actually. In my opinion, there's only one miss out of all of them, and it's the Hector support, so we'll talk about that one first. I mean, even this isn't honestly that bad. It's a little bit underwhelming since this is one of her paired endings. She has 2, one with Hector, and we'll talk about the other one last, actually, because that's one of my favorites. So the Hector one is just her working up the courage to thank him for breaking her fall. This requires some context from story we haven't seen yet, but after Lynn mode, when we get to Elowood and Hector mode, when we meet Florina again, she's flying through the sky and she gets knocked out of the air and she lands on Hector, basically, which should have killed both of them, but, you know, whatever, don't worry about it. And I guess, you know, because she landed on Hector, she didn't die, and she just wanted to thank him for that. She spends the C and B support just kind of working up the courage to say that. It's kind of funny, you know, like I said, it's not even that bad. It's just a little bit underwhelming. The A support is where she finally gets the courage to say it. And Hector's like, you know, you're welcome. And I'll fight alongside you from now on. It's all right. I don't think I could not tell you where the romantic subtext is supposed to be, but, you know, apparently it's there, because they do get married after this. So whatever. What I do like about the support, actually, this is something that I think is really funny. So as she builds up the courage to tell him, you know, she's talking to her Pegasus. I guess, you know, she's like pretending. So in the B support, she's like practicing, basically. She's pretending to say what she wants to say. And her Pegasus is like right there. And the A support, her Pegasus literally just goes to get Hector. He like grabs him by the arm and pulls him over to Florina. Or she, I don't know. I just think that's funny. Pegasus or Pegasi in the series are, you know, characterized pretty well, I think. And I really love, I think I mentioned this in some of the FE6 supports, where I really love when characters who have mounts, you know, horses or Pegasi or wyverns, and like the identity of the mount is like relevant in some way to some of the stuff they do and say, which it definitely is here. Although, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this since I'm probably not going to have a great opportunity otherwise. Florina's Pegasus Knight is a fucking disaster. So I was unsure of whether it was a he or a she Pegasus. So I just looked into it a little bit. So she uses male pronouns for the Pegasus. That's fine. But then later in another support, she refers to her Pegasus as a mare, which is a female horse. So presumably, I assume it means a female Pegasus as well. And then the name isn't even right. So she consistently refers to her Pegasus in supports as being named Huey. But in the story, I think, she calls him Makar or Makar. And it's just a fucking disaster. They could not. The localization of this game was kind of a disaster. If you went and checked out the mecha videos on this game, you would probably, you know, pick up the same impression. They did not know what the fuck they were doing when localizing this game, which, you know, fair enough. It was their first time at it. I don't know. You know, maybe they didn't get a particularly strong team together, or they just weren't, you know, they were a bit disorganized because they didn't really know what they were doing. That's all fine. You know, like, I'm not going to be that hard on them for getting a Pegasus's name inconsistent, but it's just funny. It's just a fucking disaster of a Pegasus, which I think is quite funny. But yeah, the Hector support, other than that, with the Pegasus stuff, I don't actually think it's all that good. It's kind of funny, but, you know, it's not great. All right, then she has a support with both of her sisters. I like both of these quite a bit. So Florina is kind of like teasing her, and both of them like really reflect on how much Florina has grown, but in their own distinct ways because they're both very distinct people. Florina, like makes fun of her, picks on her, teases her, and it's just generally kind of a menace. She even tells Lynn some embarrassing secrets about Florina, and that gets Florina really like upset and sad, and makes her cry. And Florina like apologizes and says that she took things too far, but she was so shocked at how much Florina has changed since the last time they saw each other that I guess she just wanted to kind of like make sure some of the old Florina was still in there, and she got a little carried away in the process. So, I mean, still kind of fucked up, but it's a cute reasoning, I suppose. And some of the stories that she tells about Florina are very funny. You can tell, like, I love sibling supports where they just like fuck with each other, because that's very genuine to the experience of really having siblings. And I think it's nice, and endearing, I guess would be the right word. The Fiora support, on the other hand, kind of follows a very similar trajectory where Fiora is honestly kind of the other direction. Or I guess you could say it's the same direction. She dotes on Florina so much. She's such a busybody, and says like, okay, well, you can come back to Ilia with me. We'll be in the same corps. I'll make sure to protect you. You're like a capable soldier, but it would be, I would make me feel a lot better if you were with me, so I could keep an eye on you. And basically just kind of dominating the conversation, not letting Florina get a word in edgewise. Eventually Florina musters up the courage to like explain to her sister if she goes with her back to Ilia and continues to stay under her wing, no pun intended, then she'll never be able to live and grow as her own person, and that's not what she wants. She wants to be herself, and to have a good life. It's cute. I think it's quite an excellent support, honestly. I mean, I really like the interactions that these two have. There's an interesting line here at the end that I'm not entirely sure how I feel about. Basically, Fiora kind of like drops the whole doting sister approach, and instead, I guess I think this is good, because I think it kind of can be seen as a sign of respect of like, okay, I'm not saying this as your sister. I'm saying this as one Pegasus Knight mercenary to another, which I think is what Florina wants. But then she says, listen closely. No matter what happens, even if you have to take a mission that you are sure you won't return from, never quit a mission that you have already accepted. We don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for the pride of the entire Ilian Pegasus Knight Brigade. And I mean, like, so I think that's fine. It's, it's characterful. And it's definitely not what you would expect her to say, which I think can be interesting in its own way. It does feel a little out of character, I guess, for her to be like, I'm doting on you as my little sister. I want to protect you. I want to take care of you. By the way, now that you have stated your intention to not, to not, follow me, and you want to be your own person, that's fine. I respect that. But by the way, just be prepared to throw your life away. And if you don't, then you're a shame on our mercenary company. I mean, that maybe is a little bit of a 180. I don't know if that really fits, but what can you do? Overall, though, quite a good support. I enjoy it quite a lot. Florina and Ninian. This is a great one. I love Ninian. Ninian's such a good character in this game. Although this does have the issue that a lot of her supports and a lot of her story dialogue have. I get, in case you haven't played this game before, I suppose I should give a spoiler warning here. Maybe cut ahead a little while, but I'm sure most people listening have played the game, or they just don't care. So whatever. Ninian is a dragon. Technically she's a half dragon, but she can turn into a dragon. And that's who she is. And she's an ice dragon specifically. Well, she's a very nice dragon, but also she is an ice dragon. They did a whole Adventure Time episode around that bit. That was quite funny. I remember that. All of her supports and all of her story, or a lot of her story dialogue and a lot of her supports have this issue where it's like so fucking obvious that she's a dragon. Like she's not even trying to hide it. It feels like sometimes. And you know, it's not like a big deal or anything. It's just kind of funny because it's like, how did no one figure this out? I mean, I think some people do figure it out. I'm pretty sure Hawkeye figures it out immediately. But you know, for the rest of everybody, it's kind of funny how no one manages to put the pieces together. Florina and Ninian just kind of bond about how they're both from Ilia, and they just kind of become friends. You know, it's nice. The C and B supports aren't really anything crazy. The A support gets into a little bit of nice, I guess, backstory, you could say. So Florina gives the legend of the Mountain of the Ice Dragon, which is basically a place where an ice dragon used to live and used to be really nice to people, but then the scouring happened and the dragon isn't there anymore. And Florina remembers that when she was a kid, she stayed up one night to like go out and try to meet the ice dragon, but you know, obviously no one was there, so she just got a cold instead, and it's a cute little story. But Ninian says, well, why would you want to meet the ice dragon? I mean, aren't dragons all like scary monsters? And Florina says, I mean, I don't think they have to be. You know, why would just someone being a dragon mean that they have to be evil? And you know, it's very on the nose. I think the funniest part though is, okay, so what does she say? Florina says, so even if two beings may be shaped a little differently, that doesn't mean they can't get along. And Ninian says, I see. Yeah, you must be right. I mean, we get along, don't we? It's just like, she's literally just saying it out loud at that point. I don't know what Florina... That's where the support ends. Like, she doesn't say anything after that. So, I don't know what Florina, like, thought about that. Or maybe she, like, this support doesn't have like the support log on the wiki doesn't have like stage directions at all, so maybe Florina leaves at that point. I don't know. It's just a bit weird. Again, not like a huge deal. I just think it's quite funny. Okay, the Nino and Sarah supports are both pretty much all comedy. I mean, calling the Nino one comedy might be a little, you know, maybe I'm telling on myself a little bit here, because she does also have some heartfelt things to say about her brothers. But I do think that the emphasis is meant to be on a more comedic slant. I mean, you know, they generally just they get along really well. Nino is like an extremely, like, I've never met a person in my life, or a fictional character in my life, who has ADHD more clearly than Nino does. She's like talking a mile a minute. She just gets distracted so easily, and she's like, "What's this? What's that?" Can I, you know, asking her a whole bunch of questions. And Florina is like, "Holy shit, slow down, one thing at a time. I'm about to have a panic attack." And before she can even answer all her questions, she just leaves. It's very funny. They continue to bond a little bit. She tells Florina about her brothers. Nino tells Florina about her brothers. And then the A support is, you know, Nino opening up, being very sincere about her fear that her brothers are going to hate her because she left on bad terms with them. She's an enemy now. She's fighting against the Black Fang, which is, you know, the organization that her brothers belong to. And now she's worried that they will never love or like her again. And they start, you know, they both, you know, Florina tries to comfort her, but they're both very emotional. They're just crying. So the reason I said that this is comedic, and the reason I think it's kind of meant to be comedic, is that like the entire like last 6 lines of the support is just them sobbing. Which, you know, like, it's not any kind of heartfelt dialogue. Well, I mean, it is definitely quite heartfelt, but it's like between sniffs and sobs and like huge amounts of ellipses. They're just like bawling their eyes out, and I don't know. I think the idea of them just like trying to comfort each other, but both of them are just too goddamn sad. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just have a fucked up sense of humor, but I think that's a funny image. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I think writing in general that blends comedy and emotion, or like, you know, sadness, I guess, because, you know, comedy is an emotion. Writing that blends comedy and sadness or like morbid ideas together tastefully is honestly great. I say tastefully because not everybody knows the difference between good dark comedy and bad dark comedy, and I just felt the need to mention that. But yeah, I think it's funny personally, and sad and heartwarming. All right, now the Sarah support is just pure comedy. I have no issues saying this. Florina and Sarah meet, they become quick friends, and Sarah is trying to teach Florina to have more confidence in herself. And this is a lot of supports go. I mean, this is just a very common writing trope. You get like the shy young girl and the more confident girl, and like the more confident girl tries to teach the shy girl to have more faith in herself. Whatever. It's a tale as old as time. And it's certainly a tale as old as Last Game, because we saw it probably in more than one place, but the only one that comes to mind is the Clarine and Dorothy support. And I thought that one was okay. This one, I think, is, like, really good. And I mean, Sarah carries it. And as I said, I love Sarah. So Sarah just kind of carries everything. But Sarah is such a fucking creature in general, but in this support specifically, she's just so deranged and like coming up with so many like weird things to tell Florina. I'm just gonna read most of the B support, honestly, because I think that's just the only way that I can communicate how psychotic this is. Okay. All right. So I'll start here. Sarah says, then you just need to have more confidence. No matter who you're with, just think of yourself as being better than them. That'll do it. I can't think of them as equals? No, not at all. Think of them as lowly little bugs if you can. As bugs? Look, your shyness is pretty deeply ingrained, right? Then you have to take drastic measures. Stand up straight, push out that chest, raise that chin, look me in the eye. No, I'm a bug, remember. Look at me with disgust. Stand up straight. Puff out like this? No, more defiant. And your legs, take a wider stance. Yeah, that's better. I feel weird. The eyes, don't forget. Raise your chin. More disdain. My neck hurts. It's so fucking good. This is like some of the funniest writing in this entire game, if you ask me. And that's just the B support. I mean, the A support, they tone it down a little bit. Oh, the A support is actually really good too. I mean, it's more for Sarah's perspective. And honestly, I don't actually think I want to get into that because whenever we do Sarah's SSS episode, I'm gonna do a whole thing. I really like Sarah, but I mean, this is just a good support. It's very funny. It characterizes both of them really well. And yeah, it's just a great support. Honestly, so many of these supports are really good. This is like the perfect example of like, I don't know, like, so many characters are just, like, pure comedy, it feels like. I mean, even going back to Will, many of his supports were comedic, and I think most of them were, like, pretty alright. But I think this blends comedy and characterization together really well, instead of forcing them to be separate for some reason, like so many supports try to do. Like, all of these supports are hysterical, and they characterize Florina, and they show off different aspects of Florina's character. She's not just like a lot of them obviously focus on the fact that she's shy, but the Ninny one focuses on her childhood and her like feelings about being friends with other, the idea of her being friends with other species. The Florina one talks about some embarrassing stuff from her childhood. The Florina one kind of emphasizes how she wants to come into her own as a Pegasus Knight. She's a very okay, maybe 3-dimensional is giving her too much credit. Most characters are 1-dimensional, so I'll say that Florina is at least a 2-dimensional character in this game. It's honestly, I like her quite a bit. But I skipped over a support earlier. We're going to talk about that now because we need to talk about Florina and Lynn. Because Florina and Lynn have a paired ending together. And this is, I mean, it's great. I love the ending. I'm trying to think about how best to segue into this because I think it's an interesting topic of conversation. So it's, probably not a surprise to know that a lot of people ship Florina and Lynn, including me. Honestly, I think they're great together. Now I think a lot of same-sex ships in media are very tenuous. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. A lot of ships in general are tenuous, and there are ships that are founded on absolutely nothing. So I think that's not particularly strange, but I think it's indicative. I mean, I notice it more, at least with same-sex ships, and I think it's because, give me an award for figuring this one out, as if it's not the most obvious thing in the world. Writers just aren't willing to go there, unfortunately. They're just not willing to do explicit romance between, or even like subtextual romance between same-sex characters. Especially in games, older games, like, this game's like going on 20 years old now, so I definitely think it counts as old. Now, obviously, things are changing a little bit, and LGBTQ representation is a lot better, which is great. But I'm getting a little bit off topic. My point is that there are a lot of same-sex couples in media, and honestly, especially in series like Fire Emblem, which have historically been really bad about their LGBTQ representation. That I just, I think are founded on very little. I really wanted to bring that up for this, though, because I honestly think this might be genuinely intentional. I mean, it's one of her only paired endings, and there are other platonic paired endings in the series and even in this game. But I don't know. It's just, their connection feels so genuine, and they have a history together. I mean, it's just nice. What I'm trying to say is that Florina and Lynn is the OTP, and I am in full support of it. And I think that it's honestly a lot more grounded of a same-sex ship than most of the series gets, which I guess now that I say it out loud is more of a dig at the rest of the series, but I meant it as a compliment to this support and their relationship together. So, take it as you will, I guess. Anyway, the support itself, I spent all that without even talking about the actual support. The support itself is all about, like, Lynn, kind of doting on Florina, kind of like Fiora, just saying, like, I'm going to look out for you, I'm going to keep you safe, etc. And they reminisce together about their time on the plains, and just, their long history of being friends. And the A support is great as well, because it really emphasizes, how do I word this? The A support is excellent, though, because it an ongoing kind of conflict for Lynn, and this is something we'll talk about, I guess, at the end of FE7, because that's where I'm going to talk about all the protagonists. But all you need to know for now is that an ongoing conflict for Lynn is how she wants to handle her new life as a noble woman in Lycia, as opposed to her kind of humble beginnings as someone on, a commoner from the plains of Sakai. And different kind of supports pull her and push her in different directions. She really, really cares about her grandfather. She wants to support her people. She understands that she has an obligation to her people and that she wants to be there to support them. In some parent endings, she ends up staying in Lycia. I'm pretty sure, just because they need to explain why it never comes up in FE6, all of her endings involve Kaelin being, like, annexed as a part of Ostia or something like that. But sometimes she stays in Lycia. Sometimes she marries Hector or Eliwood and lives with them. But this is I think one of the few. Hold on, I'm kind of curious now. Let me just check Lynn. Okay, actually, most of her endings involve her going back to Sakai. Even her support with Kent. I did forget about that because I recorded the first half of this episode, like, way long ago. So I honestly forgot about that paired ending. But the reason that I bring specific attention to this one is because this one really, like, I think it really brings out that conflict in full force and gets Lynn to think about, like, what am I really doing here? Like, I can't take this anymore. I need to. She even says like I've been reduced to like having my best friend refer to me as like someone in authority over her. It's like she just can't stand it, and like it's just not for her. And I think that the fact that this support explores that makes it a genuinely great one. I don't know if this is actually my favorite Florina support. I just wanted to save it for the end because I wanted to talk about, you know, kind of their relationship and why I think that they go well together as like a romantic couple. In fact, there's a fun thing you can do where I think Ellawood can marry Fiora, Hector can marry either Florina or Farina, but for this you want to do Farina, and then Lynn can you know, has a paired ending with Florina, so you know you can have all the lords marry the Pegasus Night Sisters. It's just kind of funny. But yeah, no, I think it's a good support. I like it quite a bit. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think Lynn gets a bad rap. I will say it sucks that she's sidelined so hard. And in the Hector, this pisses me off a lot, actually. In the Hector support, and this is true of all of his pairs, but like Lynn's a main character, so they really didn't have to do her like this. Hector's paired endings always focus on him, and then whoever he married is reduced to one word in his ending, where he's like, you know, like blah 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 blah. Hector's beloved blank, and whoever he married helped him through this tough time. It's they reduce Lynn to like her whole character ending is reduced down to one word. It's just it's stupid. I don't know. Kind of the same with Ellawood, but it's, you know, it's not quite as bad there. I don't think it's not literally one word. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is a good ship. I mean, it's my favorite, probably my favorite romantic option for. It's definitely my favorite romantic option for Florina, because the only other option is Hector. I don't know. I like Lynn and Hector quite a bit. So she has some decent options, but this is just a good ship. That's my whole point. I really just wanted to talk about Yuri. That's the only reason that I did this entire podcast was to talk about Yuri. No, it's a good support. Okay, that's everybody for this episode, and quite a lot of supports that we went through here. I definitely didn't go into as much detail as in maybe some of the FE6 supports. I think that's because we're getting to the point where there are a lot of supports, and kind of by necessity, I need to skirt through a lot of them. Otherwise, we're going to be here for literal hours. As always, if there's ever any supports that you want me to talk about in more detail, you can always feel free to tweet at me at IMainMeleeKirby on Twitter. I'm still refusing to call it X. It's not happening. I'm not doing it. But yeah, you can let me know if there's any that you want me to talk about in more depth, because otherwise I'm probably just going to gloss over it if I don't find it particularly interesting. Out of the characters, you know, we're going to continue the tradition of me picking my favorite character out of all the ones we talk about. Honestly, really close call on this one. I can tell you right now, it's not Will. I don't dislike Will. I think Will is a fine character. It's not him. He is not my favorite character in this episode. I think they all have great things going for them. I think Florina is like, I'm just gonna say Florina. Like I think that's probably what I'm gonna commit to. I like Sain a lot in his story dialogue. I think he's very funny. I think he's very endearing, because if you only look at his story dialogue, you don't realize just, you know, kind of how, I mean, he definitely is still a flirtatious loser, but it's not quite as dire, I suppose, as it is in his supports. But I do like him. I think he's funny. Kent is a little on the boring side, but I do like the kind of loyal, steadfast knight archetype. And I think his interactions with Sain are great. I think some of his supports are quite good. So yeah, he's up there for me too. But I think it's gotta have to be Florina. And she's probably the one that I like the least in terms of her main story dialogue. But the supports are just like do such a good job of characterizing her and exploring different aspects of her. I think I think they're great. So overall, I'm pretty sure it's Florina. But if I were to like, you know, put these guys on like a tier list together in terms of how much I like them as characters, they would be all very close together. So, take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, I guess. Okay. That's all from me. I actually have no idea who we're going to do next time. This was a very obvious grouping of characters to do. I'm not even sure if I'll actually do any more until we get to like outside of Lin mode. Maybe. I'm not honestly 100% sure, but we'll see. And yeah, so I guess next time will be a surprise. I hope you guys enjoyed me listening to me ramble for a fucking hour about bullshit. I mean, if you made it this deep into the podcast, I'm assuming you probably do. But yeah, new main episode should be going out relatively soon. I know it's been, at the time I'm recording this, it's been like close to 4, maybe longer months since I put out an episode. So I've been on a bit of a hiatus. Things have been a little crazy for me. And just in general, I've kind of been focusing on other things. I've been clearing out my game backlog like crazy. Been doing really, really good on that front. And then just obviously just working a 9 to 5 as, it's I'm a busy guy. Get off my back. Get off my dick. No. New main episode should be coming out soon. Yeah. That's all that I had to say. So I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.